Well, I'm a what's called a generalist psychologist. Sometimes I'll be seeing people who are quite healthy with their mental health in the normal range, but there's been an event, and so there's been might be grief and loss, or it might be there might have been a traumatic event, or something required very significant adjustment for that person. But I also have the other end as well, where I'll be treating people who would have ongoing, at times, psychiatric difficulties, so who may already have had a diagnosis of something like a schizophrenia or bipolar. I'm a private practice generalist psychologist, and so we're not an acute or a crisis service. But obviously that varies from person to person. But if we, certainly we are impacted by things that have not gone well in the past, being vulnerable, at times is unsafe. If our friendship circle or our family or romantic relationship, in some contexts, being vulnerable leads to us being harmed. That information being used to hurt us, let us down, and so sometimes it's about allowing something to happen, like creating a safe space to start off with, and allowing that to happen organically. That sort of almost, not so much teasing that out, but allowing that, like a little plant, I suppose, allowing that to grow at its own speed, and not not putting it under lots of pressure to grow too quickly, but also to not hide altogether. So it's that balance, that I can be so safe that I don't let anyone in, but then I can never be connected. I can't have true intimacy, if I can't share my stories and my hopes and my fears. Then it limits how close I can get to you. So it's that balance. And so sometimes it's the past, sometimes it's stuff we haven't dealt with within ourselves, that we need to sometimes do some of our own work, and look at our stories, where we're going, where we've been. Because if I haven't come to a point of acceptance or peace, or work my way through some of my own stuff, then getting more open, that's going to be scary for me, because I don't, I'm not ready to deal with that, and I can't sort of start putting that out there for you to ask questions about, because I'm not ready to look at the questions. I'm not ready. I might not be ready to give the answers. So you might have created a safe space for me, but I'm not ready, because I'm not ready to look at that. I've been avoiding looking at that. I've sort of maybe done the stiff upper lip, or the masculine thing, and I've squashed down, some of these fears or some of these experiences that I've had, and I'm not, vulnerability is scary, because, I can't handle what that brings up for me. All sorts of interesting things that can get in the way of us being able to just be authentic with each other. And I mean, you could talk about what the impact of social media is like when people are presenting only an aspect of themselves, and the pressure that can place on us to maintain that image. If I've got this image on Facebook that I'm always together, and I'm always happy, and I'm doing great, and doing all these things, I create a situation where it's actually very difficult for me then to acknowledge, well, actually, that's not always true. And so there's lots of things. There's not a simple answer to that question.
No, but what I'm hearing you say is, whatever triggers someone to open up, the right environment and the right time frame needs to be respected.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it starts with safety. It's sort of the bottom line, sort of physical safety, emotional safety. That someone can create a space, that aspects of self that's difficult. I mean, most of us would have some things where we're pretty comfortable to talk about. Now, this aspect of self, I might put that quite openly out there. There might be other aspects of self that are much harder, and the safer space that you provide for me. And sometimes it's that reciprocal vulnerability, that someone's vulnerable, that opens up permission for the other person. I read somewhere, not in a scholarly article, just a reflection that one of the best things you can offer another person is vulnerability.
Mm.
Is that authenticity. This is my real experience.
Why do people listen, do you think, to a sad song?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think for some people, I don't know, maybe it makes them feel less alone in their feeling. The author or the singer, is related to the story, or the person in the song, has an aspect of life or an experience that might be similar to ours. I think that idea of maybe having permission to let a feeling be there, maybe it's a little bit easier when we're listening to a sad song, and even maybe in the movies, this sort of stuff. Like it's in a sense, it's a safer place. There's some difficult thing or upsetting thing, it often sort of resolves somewhat, but it ends, the song ends and a different song comes on. And so I do wonder whether people feel less alone. People feel maybe more permission. We have all sorts of sort of rules in our society for men and women, slightly more so for men, but certainly for men and women about what feelings you're allowed to have and when, and for how long. And we label, I think, really unhelpfully, good feelings and bad feelings, which creates a really, at times, a very poor relationship with what I would identify as actually just very natural feeling. And so I just wonder whether sad songs, the feeling connection with the person singing, have permission to have the feeling, or I relate. It's like, yes, the songwriter gets me, like that's me. I have that feeling, and this is something I can do with it. Maybe I don't know how to do with it. I don't know what to do with it, or whom to do it with in my normal life. If I feel despair, or I feel hopelessness, or I'm enraged, or I really feel really lonely, and I'm surrounded by lots of other people, or I'm grieving. It might be, well, in normal life, maybe it's very difficult for me to find a place where I have permission to express that feeling, or even just to feel it. And as you said earlier, so what your own rules maybe, it's like, I don't want to be a snowflake, or I don't want to be, weak, or I don't want to be emotional, or I don't want to be some other negative label we've come up with, or someone put on us that we've taken on board. And I do wonder whether the sad song, people just feel a bit freer. So I can sit in that, I relate to that somehow. The song ends and a different song comes on, so maybe that helps me with a sense of, if I open the jar, in other circumstances, like, what's going to come out and for how long? But maybe with music, I've got a bit more. I go through a few of the tracks and they vary a little bit as to the feeling. Some have a bit more hopefulness, or some have the chorus is a little bit more maybe sad, like some of your songs, where maybe the verses are slightly different. So you're able to sort of maybe gently move between some of these feelings, or connect with particular ones. So I think it creates, in a culture that struggles with that, that I think music, potentially gives a space, creates a space for the person, which might be a really, I think that would be a big relief for me if I felt pressured to squeeze myself into some other image all the rest of the time. But if I was sitting quietly, listening to some songs and say, oh, Dad's listening to the sad songs, and the family knows just to let that, let that run. And they don't come and try and cheer me up. They just, they need to come and listen to or be companionable, but they just leave it be. Might be the only time that happens for someone, where they have that nice space that says, well, if you need to feel, like, or whatever surfaces, let it surface. And so I think there's some wonderful opportunity with music to process and express, relate to somebody else's story, and certainly that not feeling alone, like in the sense that someone wrote this song, maybe felt something like me, um, even if that person's not alive anymore, like just that they went through a phase, when they got together and wrote that song. It's like, wow, like that person had something like what I'm feeling now, and sometimes
Yeah.
that's really nice. Just that I'm not as alone. Maybe I don't feel quite as alone as
It's
I might have
a,
otherwise.
it's a huge motivator for my writing.
Foolery is misplaced rage. Open up the gate.
Because when I was young, bravery was jumping off a waterfall without measuring, how much water you've got to jump into, which really isn't bravery, it's stupidity. So
Bit reckless.
yeah, it's recklessness. That's right. Why did I think bravery was doing something reckless?
That's a cultural understanding, particularly for men, that not so much for women. I think historically, the mothers with lots of kids were brave. The nurses in the hospital were brave. Those that went caring for the sick and the aged, were brave. I think for women, and I think for men, the soldiers were brave. The pioneers were brave. Putting yourself into physical danger.
Yes.
Was brave, and I think that is brave. And I tip my hat to the firemen and the ambos and the policemen and the soldiers, and I absolutely think that is part of being brave, is putting yourself in a situation of risk,
Yeah.
particularly in order to benefit another person. It's a bit different if I jump off the waterfall,
Yeah. There's nothing in it for anybody.
I'm giving myself a bit of adrenaline rush and maybe showing off for some people there. But when a soldier turns up for training, knowing that they may be sent overseas somewhere, an ambulance officer responds to a phone call,
Yeah.
a nurse comes on shift, with who knows what type of illnesses will be there. I think that is still, I would say those are brave things. But I think it absolutely is brave to be authentic. I mean, all of us have a mix of stuff, where some of what we are and what we've done we feel proud about and we feel satisfied with. Other things we would be embarrassed about or disappointed about, or perhaps even ashamed about. And I think to be authentic, to be vulnerable, because I think that's a risky thing. I remember saying to one of Robin's friends, whom I later married, Robin, but saying fairly early on that I'd been so open. I said that I have no protection if she rejects me at this point. I've been very highly authentic with her, with the whole mix of stuff, which is what I wanted to do in romantic relationship, to be authentic. Not that I always did that perfectly, but that I'd sort of dropped some of the masks, and it was very vulnerable, because if she at that point rejected me, it would be rejecting me. Whereas some situations earlier in a relationship, in a more dating sort of situation, if the person's only seen half of me or 40% of me, and then they decide they don't want to pursue the relationship, there's some protection, because like, well, you actually haven't got to know all of me.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a bit more open with someone, trusting with someone, that is very vulnerable. And I think that is, it's brave to confront that. It can be really brave to go back to people who we need to ask forgiveness from, this sort of stuff. Like I think those sort of things are very brave. When because in a sense you're putting your your emotions on the line for another person.
Mm.
You're risking judgment or rejection, and obviously that's proportionate to how vulnerable you are. that, and most of us, I think, would say we want relationships that have that high vulnerability in them. But are we willing to do that? Like, are we determined enough? Are we brave enough to work on that? It's not just a one-off. Like, that's as you understand, in any relationship, whether it's friendship or family or romantic relationship, like, it's not, you don't do it once and that's it.
Yeah, that's right. You've got to continue.
It's
making the right choices.
And it's like our soldiers and policemen and women. It's not just once. It's over and over again. They put themselves into these situations. Where they don't know what it is that they're going to be encountering. And I think so that I suppose you've got that long bravery and short. We have these heroes that win Victoria Crosses, who do one moment of sacrifice, basically. Like, they put themselves in a situation they may very well die in order to protect others. And I think that's a form of bravery. But I think there's also that long form where it's actually over and over and over again. It's continuing, as you say, it's a commitment. I'm choosing to work on that. I'm choosing to have hard conversations when today I really just prefer to have the easy ones. Like, that I'm investing in that because I want, I want that high level relationship. And I think that the more intimate and connected you want to be with someone, the more vulnerable we need to be. And that's an ongoing, that's not one day where we share all our secrets. Like, that's
a lifetime of commitment.
Doing life, with our friends, our family, or our partners.
So it's really the why that's more interesting than the actual act. For the Victoria Cross, someone's put themselves in a high percentage of risk, but their why is the human trait that we value and we celebrate, that keeps us connected.
I probably phrase that as sort of power imbalance, where somebody's needs, somebody's desires, somebody's preferences are taking precedent in the relationship at the expense of the health and needs of the other person. And that's almost a deliberate pattern that is maintained coercively, or with pressure or manipulation or guilt by the person who has the bigger power. And we would differentiate that from a situation where, I fell down the steps and I needed care at home for 6 weeks. Obviously, because all of a sudden there's a big power imbalance there, where I'm much more dependent on the help of the other person for that period of time. We wouldn't say that was toxic. We would say, okay, that circumstance warrants that type of compromise, I suppose. But that would right itself. In a healthy relationship, that sort of help and being helped, that might fluctuate up and down. There might be weeks or particular areas of life where someone will take the lead, but there'll be other times where the other person would take the lead. And certainly when, in terms of how do we know the line, that is a really good question, and I'm not sure there's a clear answer. So certainly a red flag is when we see one of the deterioration in one of the health domains. So somebody's recreational health has suffered a lot, and so they're in a new relationship. They used to come out every Thursday night for cards and coffee. They used to be in the netball team, on Saturday morning, but now they're not doing that anymore. Their social health has changed. So they used to be, more connected with their mum and dad, or they used to be more connected with their siblings, friends, and that's reduced dramatically. Their spiritual health has deteriorated. So they used to be, whether that's in a religious sense or whether it's in a creative or artistic sense, they used to go on bushwalks and sit by the creek and write poetry, or They used to go to Sunday morning services with their friends, but doesn't suit the other one, so they're not doing it anymore. Or with their physical health has suffered, that they're losing weight or putting on weight. They're not sleeping as well as they used to sleep. They're more stressed than they used to be. They're more anxious than they used to be. Because in a toxic situation, the person that has the power molds a situation that works for them, or feels they work for them. Probably, you could argue it doesn't make them a happier or a healthier person, but it suits them, and so they're getting what they think they need at the expense of the other person, and the people around them would be able to see. I think maybe if we consider the opposite way, in a healthy relationship, what I would hope to see in a healthy relationship is that these health domains actually get better as a consequence of being in a healthy relationship. Even though you have less time for some of these other things, if I'm in a healthy relationship with my wife, then I'm actually a better son. I might be a mildly less available son because now I have a family, so I don't have the same volume of time. But because I'm in a healthy relationship, I've got a wife who encourages me to be a good son, to be a good dad, to be a good brother, to be a good friend, to take care of my friends, who wants me to maintain my spiritual health, wants me to maintain my recreational health. And so I think when we've got a situation where clearly somebody's, it's molding to a person, as not molding to the other. And when the other tries to stick up for themselves, probably one of the big litmus tests is what happens when the person who is maybe missing out a bit, or is becoming more unhealthy, if they try and be assertive, if they try and stick up for their needs, what happens? In a healthy relationship, we'd like to think they'd get a fair hearing.
Yeah.
And if things have been wrong, there'll be apologies, there'll be forgiveness, and there would be change. In a toxic relationship, particularly talk about domestic violence, that's one of the big tests. Like I talk with people, I say, oh, but he can be so nice. And I would draw a piece of paper, and I would draw a box in the middle, and I would say, in a domestic violence situation, the stuff in the box is what suits the partner. Now, if you're within that box, they can be charming, and they can be loving, and they can be patient, and they can be kind, and do all the nice things because you're fitting in with the boundaries they want. And so, well, what happens when you step outside of that? When they don't want you to visit your friends, but you go, like what happens? And in a toxic relationship, pressure of some sort, it might be abuse or threats of abuse, it might be manipulation, it might be guilt, will be applied to get you to go back into the box. And that for me is that's the toxic bit.
Yeah.
Is that one person says, no, you have to fit into this, and that's not negotiable. There's not compromise and growth. Whereas in a healthy relationship, we start off probably with different boxes, like our boxes slightly different shapes, so no one naturally just meshes together. I don't believe in the soulmate who just goes like that without any work. I believe that we have these different boxes, and we've got to sort of shave around the edges, and we've got to, learn how to compromise and learn how to better meet each other's needs. But you would have much closer to equality in that. I think in toxicity for me, there would probably be other factors, but the big one that jumps out for me is the power imbalance. Whose desires, whose routines, whose needs get precedent. And if it's very lopsided, then we say, well, that's probably toxic. That's a toxic situation. And it does show, if you're in a toxic relationship, you can't stay as healthy as a person. Like, you just can't. It's going to, it'll have to show somehow in change in lifestyle, change in physical health, change in tolerance levels. We get maybe much quieter, much louder. It's like we would notice it. You can't just absorb that.
The war is far from over, and I'm still here with wolves up in the air.
Yeah, that's another good question. I think the feeling of helplessness actually is very, very empowering. If let's say, that's a good example. Let's say I fell into a deep hole, and I identified what I think is a solution, and so maybe there's a shovel and I start shoveling, and I think I'm going to somehow make steps to come out, but it's a situation where actually that's actually not going to work. That doesn't work. I might need to come to that point of helplessness, to realize that actually I cannot alone in this situation resolve the issue. And when I stop shoveling, that's when I can hear there are people calling out to offer aid. And that I might need to accept that hopelessness. I can't manage the issue. I can't manage the feeling. I can't keep all the plates spinning in the air. And I may need that feeling. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. I may need to own that feeling, maybe share with others that that's actually how I'm feeling, to then be able to go, okay, I don't have the answer, or I can't. Maybe I've just been trying to do this independently.
I need an external resource to help me.
I need, or I need to. I need to actually work through this. I've been trying to fast forward something. I've been trying to get rid of a feeling. Sometimes we get into culturally, we get into a fight with. Grief is probably one of the most common ones. That we get into this situation where we feel pressured very quickly after a funeral, say, to look on the bright side and say he had a good innings and move on, and all these sort of horrible labels I don't like. That probably keep me employed, so maybe I shouldn't complain, but that to actually give up the fight with that, and to actually learn some helplessness, to feel helpless and say, well, actually, can you give yourself permission to be helpless here?
Now the soldiers are taking it to the streets.
Sometimes anger is the only emotion that will fuel action in a difficult situation. And sometimes it's our anger. Let me step back. One of the things that we will sometimes do in therapy is we'll talk about the different. It's called parts work, which I'm not an expert in, but it talks about how we've all inside us got sort of different flavors of self, or different aspects of self. There's the creative Paul and sort of the funny Paul, the super serious Paul. We've got, and there's an angry, there's a angry Paul, sort of the protected part, the sense of injustice part. And there's these different aspects of a person. And the argument goes that the healthiest situation is when we have a balance of those things. And so I'm able to be angry when I need to be angry. And the part of me that becomes angry often is that defender, is that part of me that recognizes injustice, that says, hey, no, a boundary has been violated. Like, this is not okay. And sometimes, the angry part of someone can get the wrong end of the stick. There's certainly been times when I've been angry, when I step back and have a look and I go, oh, goodness, that's reacting maybe based on something from long ago, or that's a build-up of other stuff, but it's just landed on that particular thing. But the emotion, is coming from a valid place. It doesn't always land on the right place. And that's how we manage anger is a different question altogether. But the actual feeling of anger, which often comes from, the defender, the protector, the part of us that has a strong sense of injustice, that identifies right and wrong. It prompts us at times to take action when action needs to be taken. And whether that's how you manage that with a mob of people, and we talk about rioting. I think that's a different question, and many layered on top of that question. But for an individual, absolutely, like the feeling of helplessness, it's well, there is a purpose, there is a message, shows us something, it brings to consciousness something. Maybe it tells us we're avoiding dealing with something.